The massive space station Kepler floated in the dark void between three star systems. Its metal walls gleamed under the light of distant suns. Inside the station, beings from across the galaxy walked through wide corridors. Some had wings, others had tentacles, and many looked nothing like what humans would call normal. Captain Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and looked around with wonder. Behind him, 11 other human officers followed. They all wore the dark blue uniforms of Earth's Space Force. The humans had been traveling for 3 months to reach this place. "Welcome to Kepler Station," said a tall, gray-skinned alien with 4 arms. His voice came through a small device that turned his words into English. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Velixian Empire. I will be your guide during your stay here." Jake shook the alien's hand. It felt cold and dry, like touching smooth stone. "Thank you, Commander. We're excited to be here." The other humans spread out behind Jake. Lieutenant Amy Foster carried a bag full of Earth's military history files. Sergeant Chris Daniels looked nervous as he watched the strange aliens walking past. Corporal Lisa Wang was busy taking pictures with her camera. "This is the Galactic Defense Academy," Zethkar explained as they walked. "We train the best warriors from every world in our alliance. You humans are the first new species to join us in over 50 years. The corridor was huge. Jake guessed it was big enough to fit a football field inside. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved through the space. Some looked like giant insects with shiny shells. Others appeared to be made of living crystal that sparkled in the light. A few seemed to be floating clouds of colored gas. "Those are Velthari," Zethkar pointed to the insect-like beings. "They are very good at working together." "Over there are the Sithrani. They think with numbers and equations." "And those floating ones are Nethqualans. They can change their shape when they need to." Jake nodded, trying to remember all the strange names. Back on Earth, humans had only met a few alien species. Most had been friendly traders or scientists. He had never seen so many different types of life in one place. They entered a large room filled with seats arranged in circles. About 200 alien beings sat talking in small groups. The sound was like nothing Jake had ever heard. Some made clicking noises, others hummed musical tones, and a few communicated with flashing lights. "This is where our classes meet," Zethkar said. "Everyone here is a military officer from their homeworld. They come to learn new ways of fighting and defending their people." A tall, thin alien with skin like tree bark approached them. He had 6 eyes arranged around his head and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. "I am Academy Director Prime Veilthus," the alien said. "We are very happy to have humans join our program. Your species has many interesting qualities." "What kind of qualities?" Amy asked. "You adapt quickly to new situations. You ask questions that others do not think to ask. And you seem to find solutions where others see only problems." Jake felt proud of his species. "We're eager to learn from all of you too." "Excellent," Veilthus said. "Tomorrow we begin the first part of your training. Each species will share their military history with the others. We learn by understanding how different worlds approach the problems of war and defense." That evening, the humans were given quarters in a section of the station set aside for their use. The rooms were simple but comfortable. Jake called a meeting in the common area. "How do you all feel about sharing our military history?" he asked his team. Chris looked worried. "Sir, some of our wars were pretty brutal. I'm not sure these aliens have seen anything like World War II or Vietnam." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. "Well, look at this place." Chris waved his hand around. "Everything is clean and organized. These aliens seem to fight wars like it's a game with rules. Our wars are messy and terrible." Amy opened her bag and pulled out several data files. "I've been putting together a presentation about human warfare. I plan to start with ancient battles and work up to modern times." "That sounds good," Jake said. "Just remember, we want to make friends here, not scare anyone." The next morning, Jake met with Commander Zethkar for breakfast. The alien commander seemed excited about the day's lessons. "I am very curious about human warfare," Zethkar said as he ate something that looked like blue soup. "We have studied your species for several months. You come from what we call a death world, a planet with many dangers." "Earth can be dangerous," Jake agreed. "We have storms, earthquakes, wild animals, and many other threats. Most of our worlds are much safer. The Velixian homeworld has no large predators. The Sithrani evolved on a planet with perfect weather. Even the Velthari face few natural dangers." Jake began to understand something important. "So your wars are different from ours?" "Oh yes," Zethkar said. "We fight to solve problems, not to destroy our enemies. We have rules that protect civilians and limit damage to important buildings. Most of our battles are decided by strategy, not by killing." Jake felt a cold feeling in his stomach. "Commander, I should warn you. Human warfare might be different from what you expect." Zethkar made a sound that the translator said was laughter. "Captain Morrison, we have studied warfare for thousands of years. We have seen battles between species that breathe poison gas and others that can melt metal with their thoughts. I'm sure human warfare follows the same basic principles as everyone else's." That afternoon, the main amphitheater filled with alien cadets. They chattered excitedly as Amy set up her presentation equipment. Jake noticed that many of the aliens looked young and eager. Some were taking notes before the presentation even started. "They seem like good students," Lisa whispered to Jake. "I hope they're ready for what they're about to see," Jake whispered back. Amy stepped up to the speaking platform. The room grew, quiet as 200 pairs of alien eyes and other sensing organs focused on her. "Hello, everyone," Amy began. "Today I will tell you about the military history of humanity. We humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. Our planet has seen many different types of battles." She started her presentation with pictures of ancient warriors. Roman soldiers marched across the screen in perfect formation. Medieval. Knights charged on horseback with colorful banners flying. The aliens seemed interested but not surprised. Jake heard some of them making approving sounds. A few were comparing the human tactics to their own ancient battles. "These early wars were fought with simple weapons," Amy explained. "Swords, spears, and bows. The armies were small, and battles usually lasted only a day." A Sithrani cadet raised a crystal appendage. "How many soldiers died in these battles?" "Usually a few hundred to a few thousand," Amy replied. The alien made a note with a device that glowed softly. "That is similar to our early warfare, very efficient." Amy continued through human history. She showed pictures of sailing ships firing cannons at each other. She explained how gunpowder changed the way humans fought. The aliens listened carefully and asked intelligent questions. Jake began to relax. Maybe Chris had been wrong to worry. These aliens seemed to understand human warfare just fine. Then Amy reached the American Civil War. The pictures on the screen showed thousands of soldiers lined up in long rows. Cannons fired into the crowds of men. Bodies lay scattered across muddy fields. "This war lasted 4 years," Amy said. "Over 600,000 soldiers died." The room became quieter. Some of the aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jake noticed that a few of the Nethqualans were changing color, which he had learned meant they were upset. 600,000? Asked a Velthari officer, his mandibles clicking nervously. "In one war? Yes," Amy said. And that was just the beginning. Human wars were about to become much larger. Jake felt that cold feeling return to his stomach. They were about to reach the really difficult part of human history. Amy Foster stood at the front of the huge amphitheater and looked out at the sea of alien faces. 200 beings from 15 different worlds stared back at her with curiosity and interest. She had given many presentations before, but never to an audience like this. The lights dimmed and the large screen behind her lit up with images from Earth's past. Amy clicked to her first slide, showing ancient Egyptian armies marching across desert sands. Their bronze weapons gleamed in the painted sunlight. "Human warfare began thousands of years ago," Amy said into her microphone. "Our early battles were simple. Small groups of warriors fought with basic weapons. The aliens leaned forward in their seats. A few took notes on glowing tablets. Commander Zethkar sat in the front row, nodding as Amy explained how humans first learned to fight in organized groups. These early wars were usually about land or resources, Amy continued. She showed pictures of Greek soldiers with their round shields and long spears. Battles were fought face to face. Warriors could see their enemies clearly. A young Valthari cadet raised one of his forearms. How long did these battles last? Most were over in a few hours, Amy replied. Sometimes a single day. The armies were small, maybe a few thousand soldiers on each side. The insect-like alien clicked his mandibles, and what Amy had learned was a sign of approval. Very civilized. Quick and efficient. Amy moved to the next section of her presentation. She showed pictures of Roman legions building roads and conquering new territories. The aliens seemed impressed by the organization and discipline of the Roman military. The Romans were very good at building things, Amy explained. They built roads, walls, and cities. When they conquered new lands, they brought their civilization with them. A Sithrani cadet, her crystal body sparkling in the light, spoke up. This is logical warfare. They fought for clear purposes and achieved specific goals, Amy nodded. Yes, their wars had clear objectives. They wanted to expand their empire and control more territory. The presentation moved through the centuries. Amy showed medieval knights in shining armor, their horses decorated with bright banners. She explained how castles were built to protect people and how sieges worked. Knights followed a code of honor, Amy said. They had rules about how to treat prisoners and protect innocent people, the aliens murmured approvingly. This was the kind of warfare they understood. Clean, organized, with clear rules and limits. Amy could see that her audience was relaxed and engaged. Some aliens were even smiling, though their smiles looked very different from human ones. The Nethqualans floated gently in their special seats, their gaseous forms a pleasant blue color that meant they were happy. Now we move to more recent times, Amy said, advancing to the next section. This is when human warfare began to change. The screen showed sailing ships with large cannons lined up along their sides. Smoke and fire erupted from the guns as the ships battled on stormy seas. Gunpowder changed everything, Amy explained. Humans could now fight from much farther away. Battles became louder and more destructive. The aliens still seemed comfortable with what they were seeing. Naval battles were common throughout the galaxy. Most species had discovered some form of long-range weapons. Amy showed pictures of the American Revolutionary War. Soldiers in blue and red uniforms stood in neat lines, firing their muskets at each other across open fields. Even with gunpowder, battles were still organized, Amy said. Soldiers stood in formation and followed orders. There were rules about how wars should be fought. A Velixian officer nodded his gray head, similar to our own powder wars. Very reasonable. Amy clicked to the next slide and felt her stomach tighten. She was about to enter more difficult territory. The American Civil War was different, she said. The screen showed a photograph of a battlefield covered with bodies. Broken cannons and dead horses lay scattered across the muddy ground. The amphitheater became quieter. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The image was more graphic than anything they had seen so far. This war lasted 4 years, Amy continued. It was fought between the northern and southern parts of America. Over 600,000 soldiers died. A Sithrani cadet made a high-pitched sound that her translator turned into words. 600,000 casualties in one conflict? That seems excessive. It was the first modern war, Amy explained. Humans used new weapons like rifles that could kill from much farther away. They also used railroads to move large armies quickly. She showed a picture of a long train carrying soldiers and supplies. Then she clicked to an image of a battlefield hospital where doctors worked to save wounded men. The weapons became more deadly, but medicine also improved, Amy said. Humans learned to save soldiers who would have died in earlier wars. The aliens were paying close attention now, but Amy could see they were becoming uncomfortable. The Nethqualans had changed from blue to a worried yellow color. Several Velthari were clicking their mandibles in distress. Amy moved to World War I. The screen showed soldiers climbing out of muddy trenches, running across fields full of holes and broken wire. This war involved many countries, Amy said. Millions of soldiers fought in trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles. The aliens stared at the images of the Western Front, miles of mud, barbed wire, shell craters extended as far as the eye could see. Bodies lay tangled in the wire, and the few trees that remained were just broken stumps. How many died in this war? Asked a Velthari officer, his voice shaking slightly. About 17 million people, Amy replied quietly. The amphitheater erupted. In shocked sounds, aliens made noises of distress in dozens of different languages. Some stood up from their seats, their body language showing alarm. Commander Zethkar held up his hand for quiet. Please let Lieutenant Foster continue. I am sure there is an explanation for these numbers. Amy nodded gratefully. This war introduced many new weapons. Poison gas, machine guns, and long-range artillery. Humans also learned to fight in the air with airplanes. She showed a picture of early fighter planes engaged in combat high above the clouds. Then she clicked to an image that made several aliens gasp. The screen showed soldiers wearing strange masks, walking through clouds of yellow-green gas. Bodies lay scattered on the ground, killed by the poisonous fumes. Gas weapons were eventually banned, Amy said quickly. Most human nations agreed they were too terrible to use. A young Nethqualan spoke up, his gaseous form now a deep orange color of fear. You created weapons specifically designed to cause suffering? Some humans did, Amy admitted, but others worked to stop their use. That's why we have rules about chemical weapons now. The aliens were becoming more agitated. Amy could see that some were having trouble processing what they were learning about human warfare. She moved to World War II, and the situation got worse. The screen showed massive formations of tanks rolling across European countryside. Hundreds of aircraft filled the sky, dropping bombs on cities below. This war was even larger, Amy said. It involved most of the world. Over 70 million people died. The number hit the aliens like a physical blow. Several Sithrani cadets made sounds like breaking glass. A group of Velthari stood up and began walking toward the exits, their antennae flat against their heads in distress. Wait, Commander Zethkar called out. Please remain seated. We must understand what we are learning. Amy showed pictures of the D-Day invasion. Thousands of ships approached the beaches of Normandy while planes filled the sky above them. Soldiers ran through the surf as explosions threw sand and water into the air. This was the largest military operation in human history, Amy explained. Over 150,000 soldiers landed on the beaches in a single day. The aliens stared at the images in stunned silence. The scale of the operation was beyond anything they had imagined. Their own wars involved hundreds or thousands of troops, not the massive armies shown on the screen. Amy clicked to the next slide, showing the ruins of Berlin. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and civilians picked their way through the destruction, carrying their few remaining possessions. The war ended when the armies reached the enemy capitals, Amy said. Entire cities were destroyed in the fighting. A Velixian cadet stood up, his gray skin now pale with shock. You fought until your cities were ruins? Sometimes, yes, Amy replied. When the cause was important enough, humans were willing to sacrifice everything. The presentation moved to more recent conflicts. Amy showed footage from Vietnam, where soldiers fought in thick jungle against enemies they could barely see. The aliens watched helicopter gunships firing into the forest below. This war was different, Amy explained. One side used traditional military tactics. The other side used guerrilla warfare, hiding among the civilian population. The concept of guerrilla warfare was completely foreign to the aliens. Their wars were fought between clearly identified military forces, not hidden. Fighters who looked like ordinary people. Amy showed pictures of improvised explosive devices hidden along roads. Soldiers carefully searched abandoned buildings, never knowing if enemies were waiting inside. Humans learned to fight in ways that made every civilian area a potential battlefield. Amy said. The aliens were clearly distressed now. Many were making sounds of alarm. The Nethqualans had turned a deep red color that meant they were terrified. Several Sithrani were standing up. Amy Foster looked out at the half-empty amphitheater. Nearly 50 aliens had already left, unable to handle what they were learning about human warfare. The ones who remained sat rigid in their seats, their alien faces showing fear and confusion. "Commander." Zethkar gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His forearms shook slightly as he stared at the screen. "Lieutenant Foster," he said in a voice that trembled, "perhaps we should take a break." "I think we need to finish this," Amy replied gently. "You asked to learn about human warfare. There's more you need to understand." She clicked to the next slide, and the screen filled with a mushroom-shaped cloud rising high into the sky. The massive explosion towered above the landscape like a mountain made of fire and smoke. "This is a nuclear weapon," Amy said quietly. "Humans invented it in 1945. The remaining aliens stared at the image in complete silence. The Sithrani cadets began making a high-pitched humming sound that grew louder and more distressed. Several Nethqualans started to lose their shape, their gaseous forms spreading out in panic. "How large is that explosion?" asked a Velthari officer, his mandibles clicking so fast they sounded like a machine gun. "This bomb destroyed an entire city," Amy replied. "Over 100,000 people died instantly. Many more died later from radiation. Sickness." A young Velixian cadet stood up suddenly, his chair falling backward with a crash. "You destroyed a whole city?" "With one weapon? Yes," Amy said. "And this was a small nuclear bomb compared to what we built later." She clicked to the next slide, showing a massive explosion that dwarfed the first one. The fireball was so large it seemed to fill the entire screen. "This is a hydrogen bomb," Amy explained. "It's 1,000 times more powerful than the bombs. We dropped on Japan. We tested many of these weapons." The Sithrani cadet called Crystal Mind Nalvex began to vibrate violently. His crystalline body started cracking as his mathematical mind tried to process the numbers Amy was giving them. How could any species create weapons capable of such destruction? Why? Nalvex asked, his voice distorting as fractures spread through his crystal matrix. "Why would you build weapons to destroy your own planet?" "Fear," Amy answered honestly. Different human nations were afraid of each other. They built bigger and bigger weapons to make sure their enemies wouldn't attack them. She showed a map of the world with red dots marking nuclear weapons. Thousands of dots covered the continents, especially in America and Russia. At one point, humans had over 70,000 nuclear weapons, Amy said, enough to destroy all life on Earth many times over. The number broke something in Crystal Mind Nalvex. His entire body shattered like glass hitting concrete, sending crystal fragments flying across the amphitheater. Other Sithrani cadets started cracking as the mental shock spread through their connected network. 3 more Sithrani collapsed completely, their mathematical minds unable to cope with the idea of weapons designed for total annihilation. The surviving members of their species began a keening wail that hurt the ears of every being in the room. "Medical emergency!" Commander Zethkar shouted into his communicator. "We need crystal form medics in Amphitheater 7 immediately." The Nethqualans were having their own crisis. Their gaseous bodies began to dissipate as they lost control of their molecular cohesion. One by one, they started floating apart into wisps of colored smoke. "Wait," Amy called out. "Please don't leave. I need to explain something important." But it was too late. The Nethqualans continued to disperse until only faint traces of their essence remained in the air. They had literally dissolved in terror. Hivespeaker Clicks, the senior Velthari instructor, suddenly collapsed. His compound eyes went dark as his neural network crashed. The insectoid alien's body began twitching as his overstressed brain tried to restart itself. Get a neural medic, Zethkar ordered. Click stage is having a complete system failure. Amy watched in horror as the amphitheater descended into chaos. Medical teams rushed in to help the collapsed aliens. The few remaining cadets sat frozen in their seats, too shocked to move. Captain Morrison stood up from his seat in the front row. Amy, maybe we should stop here. No, sir, Amy replied firmly. They need to understand the whole picture. It gets better. She clicked to the next slide, showing a treaty signing ceremony. Human diplomats from different nations sat around a large table, putting their signatures on official documents. Humans realized these weapons were too dangerous, Amy said to the remaining aliens. We made agreements to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. We also created rules about when they could be used. But the aliens weren't listening anymore. They were too traumatized by what they had already learned. Amy tried to continue her presentation. She showed modern human military doctrine, explaining how humans now tried to fight wars with minimal civilian casualties. She talked about precision weapons and rules of engagement. The Lixian cadet named Subcommander Velshin raised a shaking hand. Lieutenant Foster, I need to understand something. You said humans were afraid of each other? But you're all the same species. Why would you threaten to destroy your own world? Amy paused, thinking about how to explain human history in a way the aliens could understand. Humans lived separated on different parts of Earth for thousands of years. We developed different cultures, languages, and beliefs. Sometimes those differences led to conflict. But total destruction? Velshin asked. How could any rational being consider ending all life? Some humans believed it was better to destroy everything than to let their enemies win, Amy admitted. It wasn't rational, it was based on fear and hatred. The concept was completely alien to the galactic species. Their wars were fought for logical reasons like territory or resources. The idea of choosing mutual destruction over defeat made no sense to them. Amy showed a slide about human peacekeeping forces. But humans also learned to work together. We created organizations to prevent wars and help solve problems peacefully. Commander Zethkar stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. Lieutenant Foster, I think we need to end this presentation now. My people need time to process what they've learned. There's just one more thing, Amy said. I need to show you how humans fight today. She clicked to footage of modern military operations. The screen showed soldiers working with local populations, building schools and hospitals. Human medics treated wounded civilians regardless of which side they were on. Modern human warfare tries to protect innocent people, Amy explained. We've learned from our mistakes. We don't want to repeat the horrors of the past. But the aliens weren't ready to hear about human progress. They were still trying to understand how any species could survive having weapons of total destruction. Velthari cadet stood up, his entire body shaking. How many humans died in all your wars? Amy consulted her notes. It's hard to count exactly, but probably over 200 million people in the 20th century alone. The number hit the remaining aliens like a physical blow. Several more got up and walked toward the exits, their alien forms drooping with exhaustion and horror. And your species survived this? Asked Velshin. More than survived, Amy said. We grew stronger, we learned from our mistakes. The experience of total war taught us the value of peace. Commander Zethkar made a sound that the translator couldn't convert to words. He sat down heavily in his chair and put his head in his hands. I don't understand, he said finally. How can a species that creates weapons of total destruction also create beautiful art and music? How can you be so violent and so peaceful? At the same time, Amy smiled sadly. That's what makes us human, Commander. We have the capacity for great evil and great good. Sometimes we choose badly, but we try to learn from our mistakes. The amphitheater was now almost empty. Only about 30 aliens remained out of the original 200. Most of those were sitting in shocked silence, trying to process what they had learned. Amy closed her presentation file. Are there any questions? The silence stretched on for long minutes. Finally, a young Valthari cadet raised one of his arms. Lieutenant Foster, he said in a voice that barely worked. "Are humans still capable of this level of destruction?" Amy looked at Captain Morrison, who nodded grimly. "Yes," she said quietly. "We still have nuclear weapons. We still have the knowledge to make more. But we've also learned to control ourselves better. What if you lose control again?" The cadet asked. Amy didn't have a good answer for that question. "We hope we won't, but honestly, we can't promise that. All we can do is try to be better than we were." The cadet sat back down, looking even more frightened than before. Commander Zethkar stood up again. "I think we need to take a long break," he announced. "Everyone should return to their quarters and rest. We'll meet again tomorrow to discuss what we've learned." The remaining aliens filed out of the amphitheater slowly, their movements showing shock and exhaustion. Many of them avoided looking at the humans as they passed. Amy packed up her presentation materials while Captain Morrison watched the aliens leave. "I think that could have gone better," Morrison said. Double quote, "Sir. They needed to know," Amy replied. "If we're going to work together, they have to understand what humans are capable of." "I'm not sure they'll want to work with us after this," Morrison said. "Look at them. They're terrified." Amy looked around the nearly empty amphitheater. The medical bay on Kepler Station had never seen anything like it. Alien doctors rushed between beds, trying to help patients whose minds had been broken by what they learned about human warfare. Crystal fragments from shattered Sithrani covered the floor. Velthari lay unconscious with their neural networks still offline. The few Nethqualans who hadn't completely dispersed floated weakly in special containment units. Dr. Helver, the station's chief medical officer, stood in the middle of the chaos with 4 arms full of medical reports. She was of the Lixian, like Commander Zethkar, but her gray skin was darker and marked with the scars of many years treating battle injuries. "In 30 years of military medicine," she told Zethkar, "I have never seen psychological trauma this severe. These cadets are suffering from something we don't have words for." Zethkar looked at the injured aliens with growing concern. "Will they recover?" "The Sithrani are the worst," Helver explained, pointing to a bed where crystal medics were trying to piece together a shattered cadet. "Their minds work with mathematics and logic. What they learned about human warfare broke their ability to process reality. 3 of them may never be able to think properly again." In another section of the medical bay, Hive Speaker Clixt lay, connected to a machine that was slowly restarting his neural network. The insectoid alien's compound eyes flickered weakly as his brain tried to come back online. "Clixith's condition is more hopeful," Helver continued, "but his neural pathways were completely overloaded. He may have permanent memory damage." Zethkar rubbed his forehead with one of his hands. "And the others?" 47 cadets are being treated for severe psychological shock. 62 more have requested immediate transport home. They refuse to stay on the same station as the humans. News of the presentation disaster spread quickly through the alien community on Kepler Station. Within hours, communication channels were flooded with messages from frightened cadets to their home worlds. The Sithrani delegation sent an emergency transmission to their crystalline homeworld. "The humans possess weapons capable of planetary sterilization," the message read. "They have actually used these weapons against their own species. Request immediate evacuation of all Sithrani personnel." The Velthari ambassador Hydrone Kellenix called an emergency meeting of the insect colony's ruling council. Her antennae twitched with agitation as she spoke to the assembled drones. "These humans are not like other species," she transmitted through pheromone bursts. "They fight wars without limits. They create weapons designed only for destruction. They cannot be trusted in military operations." The Nethqualan representative had the most dramatic reaction, since most of his people had literally dissolved. During the presentation, he had to speak for his entire species. "The humans represent an existential threat to gaseous life forms," he announced to the Galactic Defense Council in an emergency session. "Their warfare concepts are so violent that exposure to them can cause molecular dissolution. We demand their immediate removal from all military programs." Captain Morrison sat in his quarters reading the flood of resignation requests that had arrived overnight. Each one was politely worded, but the message was clear. The aliens no longer wanted to work with humans. "Sir," Lieutenant Amy Foster knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. "Have you seen the casualty reports?" Morrison nodded grimly. 3 Sithrani with permanent brain damage, 1 Velthari who may never wake up, and 12 Nethqualans who completely dissipated. "I feel terrible about this," Amy said, sitting down heavily in a chair. "I knew our warfare was different, but I never expected this kind of reaction." "It's not your fault," Morrison replied. "We had to be honest with them. If we're going to work together, they need to know what we're capable of." A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry. Morrison opened the door to find Sub-Commander Velshan, one of the few aliens who had stayed for the entire presentation. "Captain Morrison," the young Velixian said, "may I speak with you privately?" Morrison gestured for him to enter. Velshan looked around nervously before sitting down across from the human officers. "I wanted to understand something," Velshan began. "Yesterday you humans seemed friendly and peaceful. You helped us with our equipment, you shared your food, you told jokes and stories, but then we learned about your wars." Morrison waited for the alien to continue. "How can the same species that creates weapons of total destruction also be so kind in person?" Velshan asked. "I'm trying to understand how both things can be true." Amy leaned forward. "Sub-Commander, humans aren't naturally evil. We developed the way we did because our planet was dangerous. We had to fight to survive. But other species faced dangers too," Velshan pointed out. "We Velixians had predators on our homeworld. The Sithrani dealt with massive storms. Why didn't we become like humans?" Morrison thought carefully before answering. "Maybe because Earth was different. We had many different human groups competing for resources. We also had predators that hunted us. Whether that could kill us? Diseases that wiped out entire populations. We learned to fight because we had to. And now?" Velshan asked. "Now we're trying to be better," Morrison said. "We've learned from our mistakes. We know that total war is destructive and wasteful. We're working to find better ways to solve problems." Velshan was quiet for a long moment. "Some of us believe you," he said finally. "But most of my people are too frightened to think clearly." The door chimed again. This time it was Commander Zethkar, looking exhausted and stressed. "Captain Morrison," he said, "I need to speak with you immediately. The situation is getting worse." Morrison and his team followed Zethkar to the station's main conference room. Inside, they found Academy Director Prime Vaelthus and several other high-ranking alien officers. "Please sit down," Vaelthus said, his tree-like appearance more droopy than usual. "We have received formal complaints from 12 species about human participation in the military exchange program." Zethkar activated a holographic display showing message after message from alien governments. "The Sithrani High Council demands immediate termination of all human military cooperation," he read. "The Velthari Colony Parliament has voted to withdraw from any program involving human participation. The Nethqualan Collective has banned humans from all their territories." Morrison felt his heart sink. "All of them?" "Not all," Vaelthus said, "but enough to threaten the entire exchange program. The Galactic Defense Council is meeting in emergency session to decide whether humans should be expelled from all military organizations." Amy spoke up. "Sir, what if we explain more about modern human warfare? We've moved beyond the destructive tactics I showed yesterday." "I'm afraid the damage is done," Vaelthus replied sadly. "The aliens aren't thinking rationally anymore. They're too frightened to listen to explanations." Zethkar showed them another message. This is from the Rigelian Empire. "They're threatening to leave the Galactic Defense Alliance entirely if humans are allowed to remain in military programs." "What about the species that want to stay?" Morrison asked. "Surely some of them understand." "A few," Zethkar admitted. "The Andromedans are willing to continue cooperation. Some of the Centauri colonies still want human advisors. But they're outnumbered by the species calling for your removal." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. If humans were expelled from galactic military programs, it would effectively end their integration into the larger community. There is one possibility, Velthus said slowly, but it would require a significant change in how we approach human-alien cooperation. What kind of change? Morrison asked. Complete separation, Velthus explained. Humans would establish their own military training facilities separate from other species. Only volunteers who specifically request to work with humans would be allowed to participate. Morrison considered this option. It wasn't ideal, but it might be the only way to salvage some kind of cooperation. What about the humans already here? Amy asked. You would need to leave immediately, Zethkar said. Your presence is causing too much stress among the remaining alien cadets. Even the ones who want to stay are having trouble concentrating with humans nearby. Morrison looked around, the table at the alien faces. He could see fear and uncertainty in their expressions, even among those who were trying to be supportive. How long do we have to decide? He asked. The Galactic Defense Council meets in 6 hours, Velthus replied. If no alternative is presented, by then humans will be formally expelled from all military cooperation programs. Morrison stood up. Then we need to talk to our people on Earth immediately. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sub-Commander Velshin approached Morrison. Privately. Captain, he said quietly, I want you to know that not all of us are afraid. Some of us understand that humans are more than just their capacity for destruction. Thank you, Morrison replied. That means more than you know. If humans do establish separate training facilities, Velshin continued, I would like to volunteer for the program. I think there's much we could learn from each other. Morrison smiled for the first time since the presentation disaster. We'd be honored to have you as the humans left to contact Earth. Morrison wondered if this crisis might actually lead to something better. Maybe working with volunteers. 6 hours later, Captain Morrison stood in the main communication center of Kepler Station, waiting for the Galactic Defense Council's decision. Behind him, his team packed their equipment and personal belongings. It looked like their time on. The station was coming to an end. The holographic display showed representatives from dozens of alien species, arguing in the council chamber. Morrison couldn't understand most of what they were saying, but their body language made their feelings clear. They wanted the humans gone. The vote is almost ready, Commander Zethkar said as he entered the communication center. I'm sorry. Captain, it doesn't look good for your people. Morrison nodded sadly. We understand. We knew this might happen when we decided to be honest about our history. Just then, an unexpected voice spoke up from the display. Strategic Mind Thelion, one of the few Sithrani who hadn't been traumatized by the presentation, was addressing the council. Before we vote, the crystalline being said, I have spent the past 6 hours analyzing the data about human warfare. I believe we are making a mistake. The council chamber grew quiet. Thelion was known throughout the galaxy as one of the most brilliant military theorists alive. When he spoke, people listened. Human warfare is indeed more destructive than our own, Thelion continued, but we must ask ourselves why. What made them this way? He activated a holographic display showing Earth rotating slowly in space. Humans evolved on what we classify as a Class 9 death world. The survival challenges on their planet are extreme compared to our homeworlds. The display zoomed in to show Earth's surface. Massive storms swirled across the oceans. Volcanoes erupted, sending ash into the atmosphere. Earthquakes split the ground and huge predators hunted across the landscapes. On most of our worlds, the biggest predator weighs perhaps 50 kilograms, Thelion explained. On Earth, humans shared their planet, with creatures weighing 10 tons or more. While we evolved in stable environments, humans faced constant threats. War scholar Hevtok, an elderly Velixian, stood up in the council chamber. What is your point, Strategic Mind? That their violence is natural? My point, Thelion replied, is that their violence comes from necessity, not choice. Humans learned to fight because those who couldn't fight died. Their entire species was shaped by millions of years of survival pressure. He showed images of early human settlements, surrounded by walls and defended by armed guards. Even their early civilizations had to be ready for war at any moment. Not war for conquest, but war for survival. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was a perspective they hadn't considered. "But what about their nuclear weapons?" asked the Nethqualan representative, his gaseous form still weak from the previous day's shock. "How do you explain weapons designed to destroy entire planets?" "Fear," Thelian answered simply. "When humans developed the technology to travel beyond their planet, they brought their survival instincts with them. Different human groups were afraid that others would destroy them completely, so they built weapons to prevent that destruction." Hevtok was taking notes rapidly. "You're suggesting that human aggression is actually a defensive mechanism?" "Exactly," Thelian said. "And consider this, despite having weapons capable of destroying their own planet, humans never used them in a full-scale war. They showed restraint when it mattered most." Back in the communication center, Morrison watched in amazement. As the debate shifted, these aliens were starting to understand human nature in a way that surprised even him. "Furthermore," Thelian continued, "humans have been studying warfare for thousands of years. They understand tactics and strategies that we have never encountered. This knowledge could be invaluable in defending our territories." "Defending against what?" asked a representative from the Regelian Empire. "We haven't faced a major threat in centuries." Hevtok stood up slowly, his ancient form moving with careful dignity. "Perhaps that is about to change," he said quietly. The council chamber fell silent. Hevtok was the galaxy's most respected military historian. If he had concerns, everyone wanted to hear them. "For the past year," Hevtok continued, "our long-range sensors have detected unknown ships on the outer rim of our galaxy. These ships don't respond to communications, and they're moving steadily toward inhabited systems." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. This was the first he'd heard of any external threat. "The ships use technology we don't recognize," Hevtok explained. "Their weapons appear to be far more advanced than anything we possess. If they are hostile, our current defensive strategies may not be sufficient." Strategic Mind Thelian nodded. "This is why we need to understand human warfare. They have experience fighting against overwhelming odds. They know how to adapt when their enemies have superior technology." The council members began talking among themselves in excited voices. The possibility of an external threat changed everything. Commander Zethkar turned to Morrison with surprise in his eyes. "Did you know about these ships?" "No," Morrison replied. "Honestly, this is news to us too." On the display, Academy Director Prime Valthus was calling for order. "The question before us now is whether human military knowledge outweighs the risks of working with them." "I propose a compromise," Strategic Mind Thelian said. "We establish a separate training facility where humans can work with volunteers from our species. Only those who specifically request to study human warfare would participate." War Scholar Hevtok supported the proposal. "We could start small. A few volunteers from each species, working with human instructors to develop new defensive strategies." The debate continued for another hour. Morrison watched as more and more council members began to support the compromise. Fear of the unknown ships was overcoming their fear of human warfare. Finally, Prime Valthus called for a vote. "All in favor of establishing a separate human military training facility?" One by one, the representatives voted. The Andromedans voted yes immediately. The Centauri colonies followed. Even some of the species that had demanded human expulsion began to change their votes. "The measure passes," Valthus announced. "Humans will be permitted to establish a separate military academy with voluntary participation from other species." Morrison felt relief wash over him. It wasn't the full integration they had hoped for, but it was a chance to prove that humans could be valuable allies. Commander Velshen was the first alien to volunteer for the new program. Within days, he was joined by 12 other brave individuals from various species. They were all young officers who believed that understanding human warfare might save their civilizations. The new facility was established on a small moon orbiting a distant star. Human instructors worked carefully with their alien students, starting with basic concepts and gradually building up to more complex strategies. "The key," Captain Morrison explained to his first class of mixed alien volunteers, "is that humans don't just fight to win, we fight to survive. That changes everything about how we approach warfare." The alien students listened carefully as Morrison described human tactics for fighting against superior forces. They learned about guerrilla warfare, asymmetric strategies, and the psychology of survival. Lieutenant Amy Foster taught courses on human military history, but this time she focused on the lessons learned rather than just the destruction caused. She showed how humans had gradually developed rules and limitations for warfare. "Modern human doctrine emphasizes protecting civilians and minimizing destruction," she explained. "We learn from our mistakes. War should be a last resort, and when it happens, it should end as quickly as possible." The alien students began to understand that human warfare wasn't about cruelty or aggression. It was about adaptation and survival. These skills might be exactly what the galaxy needed to face the approaching unknown threat. Months later, when the mysterious ships finally reached inhabited systems, the galaxy was better prepared. Human-trained alien officers implemented defensive strategies that had never been tried before. They used guerrilla tactics to harass the invaders in survival. Techniques to keep fighting even when their bases were destroyed. The war was difficult and costly, but the galaxy survived. And when it was over, no one questioned the value of human military knowledge anymore. Commander Zethkar visited the human training facility after the war ended. He found Morrison teaching a class of alien officers about post-conflict reconstruction. "Captain," Zethkar said after the class, "I owe you an apology. We almost made a terrible mistake when we tried to expel your people." Morrison smiled. "You were protecting your people? That's what good commanders do." "But we nearly lost something valuable because we were afraid," Zethkar replied. "Human warfare isn't just about destruction. It's about never giving up, no matter how bad things get." "That's the real lesson," Morrison agreed. "Humans learned to survive because we had no choice. Now we can teach others to survive too." The exchange program continued and grew stronger. Humans were no longer seen as dangerous warmongers, but as teachers who could help others prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. And in the end, that made all the difference.